Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for this 50,000 subscriber special Q&A. I am, of course, Owen from Owen Likes Comics. I'm joined today by a special guest. I'm joined by my good friend Aeric Azana. Eric, feel free to introduce yourself.
Hello, I am that Eric Azana that he just mentioned. I am very happy to be here. Happy 50K, Owen. And thanks for having me on, man.
It's a pleasure. Eric is a good friend of mine. He's been in some of the videos recently, and he has a great podcast called Geek Explained. So I thought when it came to how to approach this Q&A, I thought it'd be great to have an extra person on to kind of ask the questions and have that kind of back and forth. I thought that'd make it for quite an interesting video. So hopefully it works out. Yeah, Eric, should we get started with the questions?
Yeah, let's do it. We've got lots of questions here to go through, so we're going to just get this going. We're going to start things off with Patreon questions. Patreon is the place to be if you want to support our boy Owen. Do you want to plug the Patreon real quick?
I can do. Yeah, that's patreon.com/Owen Likes Comics. If you would like to help support the channel and help me make more videos, that would be a great place to check out.
And so we start things off here for this 50K Q&A with a question from David Deister on Patreon. He asks, and I think this is fitting since we're, celebrating the channel itself. He asks, "How did you begin the channel and what project do you plan on next?"
Well, I guess like all great superheroes, I consider myself a superhero of information. Um,
It's very humble.
you got to start with a great origin story. And while mine isn't as flashy as Superman's or Spider-Man's, basically I was, going to school one day and I was bit by a radioactive YouTuber, and ever since then, been imbued with the powers of content. Seriously, it's funny because I think a lot of people that do YouTube and do kind of podcasts or videos or any kind of online media um, normally have like some sort of background in that, in which I don't necessarily have. Like I watched a decent amount of YouTube, but it wasn't like something I aspired to do. It's more so something I just kind of tried out. I started writing reviews for comics on a couple of different websites in around 2014, 2015.
Wow.
It was like like late New 52 era,
Hmm.
because I was writing about stuff like Super Heavy, which I know you'll be quite happy
Super heavy
about.
forever.
Some of that kind of like Scott Snyder DC Batman stuff and some of the other books coming out around that time. And then after I'd kind of done some of the written side of it, I'd done some podcasts and some live streams with some friends. And I kind of thought the next extension would be to kind of put some of that on YouTube to kind of translate what I was writing and what I was doing in like audio forms and kind of putting some video with it. And I had no idea how to video edit at the time. And if you go and watch some of those original videos, you can see that I had no idea how to video edit because they're bad. Um, but then since then, it's pretty much just kind of been a learning curve, both in terms of editing and also in how to navigate the scary waters that is YouTube. But 50,000 subscribers later, I think we're not there yet. We're still learning. We're still finding out the best way to do things. But I feel like we're making good progress.
Every day is a new adventure and every video
Well, that's
is.
it. A thing I like to say to myself, and whether or not it turns out that way is for you to decide. But a thing I like to, when I approach each video I make, is to try and do something, whether it's in the script writing, whether it's in the edit, whether it's in kind of the idea of the video, in some kind of stage of its development, do something I hadn't done before.
Mhm.
Um, whether it's just like I'll see a little editing technique that one of my friends have done in one of their videos, and they're like, how did they do that? And I'll kind of spend an afternoon trying to figure that out. Whether it's a different way of structuring the video in terms of how it's written, whether it's something like using different styles of music or slightly different whatever, just trying to constantly challenge myself and trying to better myself and make better videos. And hopefully that's something that's working and is going to continue to be that way.
Yeah, man, I think it's been working so far. And
Thanks.
if you want to take anything away from that question, David, it's that Super Heavy kicked off Owen Likes Comics YouTube channel. So
I guess so.
everyone who is a fan of this YouTube channel needs to go read Super Heavy because you owe all of Owen's success to Super Heavy, to Jim Gordon as Batman. So
You
the
could say that.
You
I
could
wouldn't,
say
but
that.
you could.
So the other question from Patreon comes from Jeremy Papp. He asks, he wants to know your thoughts on how event fatigue has impacted the comics industry, specifically with retailers.
I think that's a really interesting question. Um, I can't really speak for so much as the retailer side because it's not something I've read up enough on, and it's not something I'm experiencing as much anymore. I don't really. My local comic book shop closed down a couple of years ago,
Mm,
and since then I haven't really been buying issue to issue as much. Since that closed down, I've mostly just kind of moved to buying trades or reading digitally. So that side, I don't really have the relationship and the connection with kind of physical comic book shops that I did a few years ago,
gotcha.
which is a shame because I think that part of the fandom and part of the culture is quite an enriching experience. Going to the local comic book shop, having being friends with the people that work there and kind of the regulars that come in there and talking about what books are coming out and what they're reading and what they're enjoying. That's quite a fun. That was especially when I was like really getting back into comics
Hmm.
around kind of like 5, 6, 7 years ago. That was a really big part of helping me kind of re-engross myself after having like 5 or 6, 7 years away.
Right.
Um, but in terms of just kind of my own perception as a reader and from what I've garnered from what other people have said, I do think event fatigue is a real thing. I think over the last 10 years, especially, Marvel and DC have kind of really ramped up the quantity of event books to the point where now, like, it's a guarantee you're going to get the universe is going to end style event story every year.
Yeah.
Whereas if you go back, say, 20 years, pretty much before like 1992, you maybe have like a couple of decade when like DC did Crisis in 86.
Hmm.
That was this crazy massive thing because they'd never done a story on that scale before. And the same with Marvel with stuff like Secret Wars and the Infinity Gauntlet. It was kind of unprecedented, and that's what makes those stories special. And I think there are still plenty of great event books, even still like to this day.
For
But
sure.
with there being so many of them, it's hard for each individual one to feel special. How it's kind of hard as a reader as well to get kind of excited for whatever this big story is when you've just come off another big story with the same level of expectations, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I mean, I think, and I'm probably getting the timeline wrong on this, but I remember feeling really good about like War of the Realms couple years ago because it was a fun event. It was good.
Yeah, it was good.
I thought it was a great like closing chapter to that big, Jason Aaron Thor run, and then we had the
Yeah.
epilogue with King Thor. But I remember being like, okay, this is a great event. Everything's kind of centered around this is awesome. The event wrapped up and I'm like, cool. And then you get the solicitation like absolute carnage, everything's gonna die. And I'm like, wait a second, guys, what are we doing here? And yeah, I think it makes events feel less special. Cause like, I mean,
Yeah.
what to your point, like Infinite or I was gonna say Infinite Crisis. Crisis on Infinite Earths feels special even now, like looking
Yeah.
back on it, because it was like there was no huge event like that. There was Crisis on Infinite Earths, and then there wasn't a big event again until probably like what, Zero Hour?
Yeah, 0 hours, unless you count stuff like the death of Superman,
Oh, true.
which
Yeah.
had like the ramifications in other books. Same with stuff like Nightfall.
Right.
But even then, it's like it's still like while the ripple effects are felt in other series, the
Yeah.
death of Superman is still mostly contained to the Superman books.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, it crossed over into Justice League and into a couple of other stuff, but it wasn't a case where you had to read. You had to pick up the next issue of Wonder Woman or Flash or Aquaman to
Right.
understand what was going on in the death of Superman. And it's not like it had its own limited series as well. It was just playing out in Man of Steel and Action Comics and such. So you're probably looking at 0 hour.
Yeah, and I mean, to that point too, like deaths like used to be like big events, like a death of Superman type deal. But like now, like you don't get time to breathe because like if a character dies, it's like, okay, gotta, put him 6 feet under because we got a whole new big event coming up in like two
We
weeks.
got to kill more
We
characters.
gotta kill more characters. And it's like, yeah, I don't feel like the way that comics are right now, you could get like a big funeral for a friend story because it's like, oh, sorry, we got to jump right into like, say, like Zero Hour. It's like,
Well, that's it. And I don't think there's a bad thing to do in these kind of large scale, big crossover stories because there's loads of them that are great. Some of the best comic stories of all time are event books.
For
But at the
sure.
same time, it's those kind of quiet moments in between the world ending that I think a lot of people really resonate with in
Yeah.
comics. Issues like Funeral for a Friend or these kind of shorter self-contained character runs, whether it's Spider-Man, Batman, whoever,
Mhm.
those kind of stories in between the big crossovers are usually the ones that people really gravitate towards and are especially accessible for newer readers as well because they don't require as much kind of pre-reading and knowledge about continuity and all the goings on as say if you were going to jump into DC and read whatever crisis they've cooked up this month.
Right. So, speaking of comic books, we're going to jump into a YouTube question here from Alex Orozco. He asks, what was the comic or piece of comic book related media that got you into comic books?
um I think it's kind of a combination of a couple. What first got me into superheroes were, and this is probably anyone of my generation, this is the answer. It's the 90s animated shows.
Yeah.
Um, I can't remember which one in particular was like the one that got me hooked.
Mhm.
It was probably one of Spider-Man the animated series, Batman the animated series, X-Men, or maybe Superman. They were like the four. Though I do have a deep soft spot for the Fantastic Four animated series because it has the greatest theme song ever written. It's a great like 60-second distillation of everything you need to know about the Fantastic Four in the context of an absolute banger. It's great. Um, but it was kind of those shows. And I think what's great about those, and I've gone back and rewatched a few of them for videos, and then just because Disney Plus and other things like that, it's quite easy to get back into binging all those old shows.
Right.
Is they do a great job of not only like adapting the world of these characters for new readers, but in a way that's like so endearing to the source material. Like I'm specifically thinking of X-Men the animated series right now. um, there's so much of that show that not only is it accessible for kids and for kind of all ages because it does deal with some dark stuff, but it's
Right.
also so faithful to like the Claremont and Byrne era,
Mhm.
and it just rips stories straight out and doesn't really change a whole lot in a way that like if you really love that show, you can quite easily then go and jump into kind of that era of X-Men comics and really kind of fall in love with it. And same with the kind of the Spider-Man show,
Yeah.
Batman the animated series as well. It was kind of a combination of those, and then like um, the the first Sam Raimi Spider-Man movie was big for me.
Agreed.
Um, I was quite into the Burton and Schumacher Batman films as a kid. And then through that kind of, I think the first like proper comic I picked up was Ultimate Spider-Man. That was like the first book that was like my regular, that I have like a pull list for. I would make sure I
Nice.
went and got every month. I don't know if that's the first comic book I ever read. I'm sure maybe someone like gave me one or what, or I kind of just picked one up randomly before that. But that was the first one I remember like having a genuine attachment to.
Mhm.
Um, I have, and it's in my bookshelf behind me. It's like a collection of like I think it's the first two volumes, um, like the entire kind of like Green Goblin saga, and it
Right.
also has some backups of like Amazing Fantasy 15 and Amazing Spider-Man issue one,
Mhm.
and that was given to me like at least 10 years ago,
Yeah.
longer, definitely longer, because it was kind of I think I got that around the time I started. So I don't think I started at issue one. I think I jumped in at like issue 30. And then I think someone
Wow.
either had that or bought that for me to kind of be like, okay, here's how it starts. So you can kind of catch up.
Mhm.
So it's probably 15, it could be 20 years ago at this point. Time is a scary thing. And I still have that today. I was rereading that a couple of months ago and kind of revisiting that first period of Ultimate Spider-Man. So that's still a series that I have like quite a big emotional attachment to. It's still my favorite version of Spider-Man,
Mhm.
and it's still probably I'd still credit that as the book that really got me into comics.
Yeah, and I think this is the perfect time to plug Owen's videos on the Ultimate Universe. Some of
Yeah,
my favorites from the channel for
yeah,
sure.
they're definitely like some of people's favorite videos. That kind of series of videos on the Ultimate books, they always seem to do really well, which is funny because I kind of consider the Ultimate Universe as kind of something that gets forgotten about a bit.
Hmm.
Um,
Well,
but
especially because they
whenever
moved all the best stuff over into 616 now.
Yeah, and there's kind of like there's the there's really like the pre-ultimatum years and the post-ultimatum years, and there's
Yeah.
a really big change in interest in it in between
Right.
those two time periods. But yeah, whenever I seem to do a video on the Ultimate books, it's always really well received, which is nice to me because a lot of the comics I really got into Marvel reading, um, and it's nice to know that people still have very strong opinions on them. Whether it's the good stuff like the recent Ultimate Fantastic Four video looking at the Maker, there's
Mm-hmm.
loads of great comics in that. Whether it's
So good.
the original Ultimate Fantastic Four run, Hickman's run on the Ultimates post Ultimatum,
Yeah.
Cataclysm, and then going into stuff like Secret Wars. There's loads of great comics in that. Or when it's even stuff like Ultimatum and Ultimates 3, which are like some of the some of the most not good comics that Marvel have
Yeah.
put out in the last like 20 years. People still remember them and people still want to talk about them and have discussions about them. So I always find that really cool. And it makes me want to do more Ultimates videos. I've just put another one on the schedule for, I won't say when, but it's something I'm working on. So hopefully people will enjoy that one as well.
It's definitely going to be tracking the relationship between Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch in the Ultimate Universe, right? That's the next
I think
video.
that might have to be a Patreon exclusive.
you you got to
I'm going
pay
to be
for that
honest.
one.
Well, I'm just worried about it getting taken down because I don't think it's
True.
probably not safe for work.
So, speaking of work, over on Twitter, Eduardo Ruiz at Childish Edbino wrote, as a PhD student interested in tackling more creative endeavors while having very limited free time, I gotta ask, how do you balance pursuing your PhD with working on more creative projects like the channel?
That's a good question. Firstly, Eduardo, congrats for embarking on the PhD. It's something I've
Yeah.
only started doing this year, but just getting a place to do one and getting the opportunity to study for one is a massive achievement in of itself. So congrats. For me, I think it's slightly been easier for me to balance everything given the current situation that I've been in basically since it started. Um, in that well, it is very time consuming to do both a doctorate and also put out a video every other week. You do have to become a very well oiled machine and you can't really be behind schedule because
Hmm.
it's really like a house of cards. Uh, one piece, it's like a Jenga tower. If one piece falls, you're basically starting again. But I think in a kind of way, the pandemic and the situation has kind of allowed me to focus on my work and my creative outlets quite a lot, without any of the kind of distractions that might arise. Um, and so I guess that's one positive thing that might have come out of the last year is being able to kind of focus on these are the things I want to do, these are the things I'm passionate about, and being able to dedicate the right amount of time to them to make sure that everything's going as it should. I'm happy with the output on both sides. How things will be in the future, who knows? But you can only really take it as it comes and hope for the best for the future. But yeah, I just think like find it, especially when you're doing a doctorate, whether or not you have any other kind of creative outlet or kind of commitments beyond that, it's still going to be very important to balance your time. One thing that when I started, my supervisors and my advisors were very big on stressing was don't let it become your life because it's a
Mm,
really stressful thing to do. The research side of it alone is an incredibly stressful process. Never mind all the other things that come along with it. And if you just kind of obsess over it and it takes over your life, obviously it can have an impact on your mental health. So we were
right.
very keen on having a life outside of just being a doctorate student, and having other creative outlet that gives me so much joy and allows me to write about things that I don't get to write about in an academic setting. It's a nice palate cleanser for me. Um, it means that the things I'm writing about never gets kind of monotonous and boring because I'm always kind of jumping and researching different stuff on
Right.
both sides. So I guess that's the long answer. The short answer is just balance and just try not to let it overwhelm you, I guess.
Yeah, that's a big undertaking, and from someone who is not good with academia, like I tip my hat to both of you guys because it's tough, especially like to balance all that stuff. So
Yeah.
that's a lot. But speaking of academia, from your YouTube community, Thought and Word writes in, how and to what degree does your work in academia intersect with your work on YouTube?
See, that's a kind of it's something I hadn't really thought about until I was putting these questions together. But I think they actually do. Now, while my doctorate isn't, or any of my kind of academic career hasn't been looking at comics, I've predominantly been based in history, mostly kind of British social history of the last 150 years. There's not a whole lot of crossover to DC and Marvel there. But a lot of the research skills and a lot of the techniques you do when you study history kind of do apply into the way I approach videos, especially like evaluating sources and kind of being able to assess what's kind of the best and most valid information, being able to articulate hypotheses and arguments in a succinct way. That's all stuff that, whether it's kind of a bachelor's, a postgraduate, or a doctorate, um, something they kind of really hammer into you. So that is just kind of the way I research and write now. And so it's kind of, as I've been doing the academia alongside YouTube, um, those kind of skills have translated into the videos, and I think that it's helped. I think it's helped make the videos to the quality they are. I think I always kind of wanted the videos to have like this kind of short documentary style to them,
Hmm.
like a 15, 20, 25-minute long documentary that gives you everything you need to know about a specific story or character in that time, both like the fictional side and the real world side. And using that kind of academic approach, both kind of helps create that um, feel for the videos, but also helps me in that that's the way I write. And I think that it turns out well on both sides.
Yeah, I think the best example of that is probably the Spider-Man life story video that you did. That was essentially like your take on a Ken Burns documentary.
Yeah, that was I don't know where I got the idea to do a kind of a Ken Burns inspired documentary on that, but I'm a big fan of, obviously, as a historian and someone that likes informative media.
Yeah,
Documentaries are something quite that I'm quite passionate and quite fond of, and Ken Burns is like one of the best history documentarians around. So um, trying to not so much mimic, but capture the essence of that style of media was something I was quite keen on exploring.
yeah,
And the premise of Spider-Man Life Story being this kind of fly on the wall look at someone's life in real time over 50, 60 years, I thought that kind of story lent itself well to a documentary approach.
for sure.
And I think it's one of my favorite videos I've made. I'm really proud of that one.
Yeah, and as someone who has done stuff on the podcast for like life story, I never would have thought to do it in like a Ken Burns documentary style. And I was just, when you put that out on Twitter, I was like, I was blown away. I was like, well, of course, like it feels so obvious, but no one would think of that except for you. It's just, it's cool, man. It's super, super cool. So, next up, we have a question also from your YouTube community. This is, and I know I'm going to say this incorrectly, so I apologize in advance. Tevya Smolka, who asks, what is your favorite event comic from the past decade and why?
Ooh, this is a quite a easy question because I've recently reread it. It's the 2015 Jonathan Hickman Assad Ribic Secret Wars.
Yes.
I could maybe argue it's the best event comic, at least at Marvel
Yeah.
ever.
I think
I
that
could
argument could
even
be
make the
made
argument it could be the best event comic.
for sure.
I
I
get
mean, it you would have to have a really strong counter argument, especially if
yeah.
you're talking about just event comics in the last like 20 years.
Mhm.
Like that kind, it feels like it stands head and shoulders above the rest of them.
Yeah, but to me, it's as good as anything. Going back as far as you kind of going back to the Silver Age and as far back as you want to look,
Yeah.
it's great because it builds off like a decade plus of storytelling that Hickman did. You know,
Hmm.
it builds off ideas established in his Fantastic Four run, never mind his Avengers run, and has
Right.
characters in it that play a big role that were created in his Ultimates run, like the Maker. Um, it's a great reimagining of the original Secret Wars story while also combining elements from other stories like Crisis on Infinite Earths.
Hmm.
Um, And as well, I think one of the benefits of it was basically the only thing going on at Marvel. So all the other books that they were publishing kind of got turned into tie-ins. So you get so many amazing tie-ins with Secret Wars as well. You've got Ultimate End. You've got, was it 1872,
Yeah.
the
Mm-hmm.
kind of Western inspired
1872.
one? I
Super good.
loved that book. You had Renew Your Vows. You had Old Man Logan.
The
There were
Civil
so
War
many
one was
great,
one
yeah,
of
the
my
Civil
favorites.
War one.
Super good.
There were so many awesome tie-ins in addition to the main story being brilliant and being this kind of, especially at a time when the Fantastic Four weren't a priority at Marvel. You know,
Mm-hmm.
this was the period where they didn't have their own ongoing series.
Yeah.
Hickman basically did this story about how at the end of time and the end of reality, it comes down to Reed Richards and Doctor Doom. Like they are
Yeah.
like the two, like the embodiment of good and evil in the Marvel universe, and it's they kind of fulfill those roles of Reed embodying all that is good and all the heroes, and Doom embodying all that is bad and is all the villains. It's just it's a beautiful tribute to kind of a team that deserved better at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just I think it's a story that's going to age well with time as well.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And to Jeremy Papp's question earlier about event fatigue, like if you feel like exhausted by events because they're just like not like hitting right, Secret Wars feels like a big deal.
Yeah, it
Like
did.
in this landscape that we were talking about like events not feeling special anymore, this felt special. It felt like it was something groundbreaking.
Mm-hmm.
And it was one of those events that you, as good as the tie-ins are, and I would have to really rack my brain to think of an event that had stronger tie-ins, that especially like we said in the last 20 years, you don't have to read them to read the main Secret Wars book because it's just great.
Exactly.
So we're gonna hop over into some comic book film questions.
Okay, let's go.
First off, because we know comic book film discourse, especially on YouTube and Twitter, is very civil. It's
Very
always,
respectful. Very
yes, absolutely.
people love to hear other people's opinions and takes.
It's almost too
Always.
polite, I think,
Maybe
personally.
it is.
So from Twitter, we have a question from Charles Oni Kidwell at Baloney Kidwell. He asks, is it better for films to be comic accurate or tell their story?
I think the first job of a filmmaker or the storyteller making that movie is to do what's right for that film.
Mm-hmm.
I think obviously there are certain tenets to characters that you can't change. Like say for example, if you're making a Batman movie, Matt Reeves can't currently he can't just suddenly wake up and decide it's not going to be set in Gotham City. He's not going to dress up as a bat, and his parents aren't going to die. He's just going to be a man that has a baseball bat and goes around hitting people with it.
Great,
Like
perfect.
that
Batman.
would be an instance where they really should be comic accurate. But I don't think like as a rule of thumb, changes to the source material are necessarily bad. I think that to use a really recent example with Black Widow, with the character of Taskmaster,
Yeah.
without getting into too much of the spoilers with that, it's a very different character from the comic version.
Right.
And I think while a lot of people may not like that iteration because it's such a departure from the comic Taskmaster, I think in the context of the story they're telling, I can understand why they'd basically reinvent the character in this context. I don't think you could tell the exact same story
Mm.
with the Taskmaster from the 616 universe, for example.
Yeah.
So, and I think that whether or not, say, for example, this version of Taskmaster works, whether or not fans respond well to it, should be based around the performance, the writing, its role in the story, more so than how much it is like the version from the Avengers game or the comics or the Spider-Man game or whatever.
Right.
So I think like as long as you stick to like the core ideals of a character, like a Spider-Man movie, it should probably be Peter Parker or Miles Morales. They should
Mm-hmm.
get bit by a spider. They should like probably be in New York and swing around and have an awful amount of life problems. As long as you kind of tick those boxes, like if you want to create, like if you don't want to like adapt a specific book and you want to come up with an original story, cool. If you want
Yeah.
to fill it with original characters that aren't like the usual supporting cast, cool. You know,
Right.
what I like about comic book movies, especially now we're getting to a point where like with say someone like Batman, we're on like the seventh or eighth actor playing them,
Yeah.
you can get a really interesting new version of that character.
Hmm.
And if it doesn't work, and, and if audiences don't respond to it, they'll just do another version in another couple of years. It's like, the Batman debate. Ben Affleck was Batman for a time. I really enjoy his portrayal of Batman.
Hmm.
Um, and then they've moved on and they've done the Robert Pattinson version, and that will be a really different version of the character.
Right.
And if that responds well, they'll do more. If it doesn't, they'll hire another director, they'll hire another filmmaker, and they'll do another really different version of Batman. And
Right.
I think, to me, I think that's the thing. It doesn't have to be beholden to a specific kind of comic accuracy, because also the characters change a lot in the comics anyway.
For sure.
Which story and which writer are they being accurate to? Characters like this have been around for almost a century, and they've been kind of changed and molded and reimagined countless times. So I
Right.
think as long as it still feels like the character, then I think you're good.
Yeah. I think especially in this new like multiverse status quo that we've
Exactly.
got, all kinds of interpretations are welcome to at least give a swing at least once.
Mhm.
So, speaking of which, we have a question from Sheldon Moore who asks, "What's your hot take on geek culture becoming more accepted in society, and how was it for you growing up?"
I think it's a good thing. I think it's cool that like average, ordinary people in the general public like have a deep understanding of who Thanos is.
Yeah.
If you told someone that 15 years ago, that'd be like
Who?
the most mind-boggling thing to kind of get your head around.
Yeah.
That people would now be talking about Kang the Conqueror and what this means if they're going to adapt Secret Wars and all this stuff. It's like these kind of like really kind of multi-level layered in nerd culture stuff and
Hmm.
now just mainstream and acceptable, and I think that's cool.
Yeah.
um and I think that, as for me, obviously comics weren't massive when I was a kid. There was never like, I don't think there was a stigma against them per se. I don't think it was a
Mm.
thing where like you'll get beaten up if you're caught reading an issue of Spider-Man. um I mean, at least for me, yeah, I'm not talking about anyone else's experience, but it was never like the thing that everyone could talk about.
For sure.
In a way where it's like, if you meet someone in a kind of social setting that you don't know, you can probably talk about, oh, have you seen Loki? What did you think of that? Or,
Yeah.
what's your favorite Marvel movie or whatever? In the same way you talk about sports or news or that kind of stuff. It's just a thing that everyone has some kind of common shared understanding of. And I think that that kind of, because at the end of the day, I think whether or not it'll stay this way forever, things in popular culture come and go.
Right.
But as people that are kind of always love these characters and this kind of medium, the fact that more people are appreciating them and it's a bigger thing is good
Mm.
for everyone. It's better for the people telling the stories, both the comic creators and the filmmakers, and it's better for fans because we get more and more chances to spend time with those characters that we love. So
Yeah.
I think it's good.
Absolutely agree. As someone who did get, you know, did do the whole like nerd bullying thing, like who was like raked over the coals for liking comic books. It's really exciting to see people get excited about
Yeah.
comic book stuff now. Now people are like, "Oh man, like Kang's coming, like maybe we'll get the new Avengers." And I'm like, "You know about the new Avengers and the young Avengers? What's going on here?" So it's very cool to see. Um, and speaking of those shows, Gabe Campbell from your YouTube community asks, "What are your thoughts on the MCU shows, and what do you think the biggest challenge for the MCU moving forward is going to be?"
I've enjoyed all of the shows to varying degrees. Obviously, Loki's just wrapped. I think that was my favorite out of the three.
Agreed.
But I think they've all been really good. I think that they've all felt important. They've all felt like a kind of big deal, and obviously they've not been made on a television budget. They've really kind of put some money into these shows to make them feel just like longer versions of a Marvel movie. And I think um, that making it clear that this is still MCU, it's just in a different format,
Right.
makes it kind of more must see than say some of the stuff that was on television or on Netflix in years previously, where
Yeah.
it was MCU, but is
Eh.
it really? You know what I mean? And not to disparage any of those shows, some of them are stuff like Daredevil is fantastic, but
Right.
they always kind of felt like they were supplemental to the MCU.
Mm.
Whereas, like, especially with Loki, which is just wrapped, there are things that happen in that show that are going to have major ramifications in the Marvel films now.
Yeah.
And that if you haven't watched the show, you're going to go into some of these big tentpole Marvel films and be really confused because you're going to feel like you've missed a part of that story. And it's because it's playing out on television.
Right.
And I think, changing the formula so much where it's not just movies anymore is quite a big gamble because is their audience going to respond to television? Are they going to, it's one thing to say 3 times a year you have to go to a cinema and watch a movie, but then also, 4 or 5 times a year you've got to watch an 8 episode show is quite a different ask for fans and for their audience. But so
Absolutely.
far, it seems to be responding well. All of the shows have been like a pretty big deal.
Mm-hmm.
Most people I know who are into the Marvel movies have watched at least one of the shows, if not most or all of them. And I think they've all been really good. And I'm excited for what's coming up. I'm really excited for the What If animated show. I'm really excited
Yeah.
for Hawkeye. I've just started rereading Fractions Run to kind of refamiliarize myself.
A
And
masterpiece
yeah,
of a
I
run.
think that, like, I think in general the Disney Plus shows have been like a big success, whether it's the
Yeah.
Marvel stuff, whether it's the Mandalorian. Um, Obviously they've been slightly impacted by not being able to produce as much stuff as they would because of the goings on in the last year. So I
Right.
think it's only going to get better from here as kind of production ramps up again and we get stuff like all of the other upcoming Marvel shows. Then we get stuff like Obi-Wan as well. So
Mm-hmm.
there's going to be loads of great shows coming on there. And I think with the track record already, both like just MCU shows and beyond, it's really exciting.
For sure. Absolutely agree. And I think what I think the challenge is going to be is getting people to still go see the movies. Just
Mm.
because the shows have been such a good quality so far.
But I think but the thing with that is the shows are that good. You want more,
Yeah,
despite the
that's a
fact
good
they're like
point.
8 hours long. If you just finish watching Loki and you're like, I need some more MCU kit. You see Black Widow's on at a cinema, or you can watch it on Disney Plus. You can be like, yeah, I'm up for some more Marvel. So
That's a good
yeah,
point.
I actually think it works the other way, and it could be a positive.
For sure. So we've hit the halfway point in the Q&A, so I'm going to hit you with some rapid fire questions.
Okay.
We are going to go through these questions and you can give me an answer in a sentence or less.
Okay.
Here we go. First, from Pista Alcohol. I know I said that incorrectly, and I apologize. How do you prefer comics? Digitally, single issues, or collected editions?
My go-to is always collected. I'm mostly a trade reader now. I do have to use digital comics, of course, when I'm editing and putting the videos together,
Mm-hmm.
just to get those crisp, lovely HD scans. But my go-to way is normally to read by the trade.
Gotcha. Jack Arnold asks, what are your feelings about MCU Spider-Man?
Homecoming's a really good movie. Far From Home wasn't for me as much. The stuff in it I like. The stuff in it I don't like. It's not up there um, in the kind of Spider-Man movies I get really excited for. But overall, I think that they're onto something really good. I think they've integrated the character into like an already existing universe quite well. I think
Mm,
Tom Holland's like perfect casting for Spider-Man. And as he ages up in real life, I'm excited to see how we kind of see Peter grow in a way we've never had in any of the other films.
for sure. Spectacular X Stan from Twitter at great underscore Avenger asks, what is a comic that you think is a must read for every fan of this medium?
Ooh, New Frontier, Darwin Cook. I think if you want to know why people love comics so much, especially DC,
Mm-hmm.
because obviously that's what that book's about. But if you want a great distillation of what makes people love the DC universe, The New Frontier is like the ultimate love letter to the Justice League and all the big DC characters. And it's also just a great story that's self contained, so you don't need to read anything. It's got
Right.
really cool art, it's well written, it's funny. And yeah, I think if I was going to give anyone said, give me a great comic that I don't need to know anything about, probably hand them New Frontier.
For sure. Super Swim Team 7 from Twitter at Super Swim Team 7 asks, who are your favorite non comic YouTubers and who are your favorite comic tubers?
I think there's loads of really cool people making YouTube videos right now, both in the kind of comic space and without it. I think in the comic space, I'm really enjoying what people like. A lot of my friends like Matt Draper, Scott from Nerdsync, Comic Drake, are all doing really great stuff. There's loads more I could name. Critical Rants for every kind of geek.
Yeah.
Especially those two guys, like kind of newer on the scene,
Hmm.
are making some of the best videos about comics.
They're
Um,
crushing it right now.
every kind of geek, especially his X-Men series, is like some of the best videos you'll see.
Ridiculously good.
The editing on those, the production value is insane, and they deserve a lot of love. Outside of comics, I think that I'm really enjoying, especially over the last year during the pandemic, Patrick Willems' videos. He was already kind of a creator I really admired and enjoyed, but he's really taken it to a new level
Hmm.
with this kind of almost like serialized story within video essays. It's
Yeah,
such like a great um, thing to add to the kind of medium of just of the kind of the form we expect from a video essay. That kind of almost like short film vibe to it.
for
I
sure.
think another friend of mine that does a very similar thing is Bailey from Loverboy Media, who
Yeah.
I, I I don't think I've ever seen a video of his I don't just absolutely love. Um, my favorite video of his is I think it might have been one of his first Why I Love videos. He did a video essay on the band Brockhampton, and why
Mm,
they're his favorite band. And I knew nothing about Brockhampton. I'd maybe heard a song or two, but I
yeah,
couldn't tell you who was in it. I couldn't
right.
tell you what their albums were called. I couldn't tell you where they're from. They were just I was aware they existed, but I wasn't a fan or anything like that. Like
Hmm.
that. And yet I watched him do like a 20-minute video essay on like why this band's so awesome and why they mean so much to him. And he even like shot the intro with like, "Hi, my name is Bailey, and this is why I love." And he's at a Brockhampton gig. He's like
Ah,
in the crowd.
oh, that's cool.
Like as soon as I saw that, I was like, okay, this is amazing. And I came away from that being like, oh my god, Brockhampton rock. Despite the fact I couldn't name a song by them. I was like, oh, these sound like such a good bunch of boys, and making good tunes, and they mean so much to people.
For
So
sure.
yeah, I think he's one that like anytime he uploads, I'm instantly like drop everything I'm doing. I'm going to sit and I'm going to enjoy this.
For sure.
It really kind of there's a lot of people that kind of inspire me to kind of keep going and make better videos myself, and he's definitely a big contender for that.
Yeah, absolutely agree. He's somebody I just got into recently, and I just found his Mission Impossible video, and it
Yes,
spoke
it's
to
such
my
a good video.
soul.
You can really just binge all those videos, and
Yeah,
to
super
watch
freaking
all them
good.
for the first time is something I'm very jealous of.
Yeah. And then I mean Patrick H. Willems, he is the Jonathan Hickman of YouTube. Like long-term storytelling, he's got multiple threads going. He's fantastic.
I mean, he got really happy, I think, when someone called him the Terrence Malick of YouTube, but I
Okay,
think he'd
fair.
love Hickman. I mean,
I
who
hope so.
wouldn't? I don't know what that makes me.
Yeah.
Um, I might just grow my beard and get really grumpy and be the Alan Moore.
Perfect.
Or maybe I'll like make really good videos and then make a load of weird videos and be like the Frank Miller. I don't know. I'll think about it.
We'll get that down for the 100K. Exactly
Okay, cool.
what your title is.
Hopefully I'll have some time, but not too much time to work on that.
And then finally, in our sort of rapid fire section from George Tortellini on your YouTube community channel, what is your favorite author artist duo in comics?
Um, Bendis and Bagley's probably for me because like that's the duo I associate with like my formative years in comics.
Yeah.
I remember reading Cataclysm: The Ultimate's Last Stand, which was like 26. Uh, no, because that was before Secret Wars. So it was probably like 2013.
Hmm.
And that was like the first time they'd reunited on an Ultimates book since uh, they killed Peter off in Ultimate Spider-Man,
Right.
and Bagley was replaced by Sarah Pichelli. So just like I remember at the time reading Cataclysm and seeing that it was Bendis and Bagley together,
Hmm.
and it like really like I got like such like an emotional reaction out of it because like they're the writer and artist combo that like made me fall in love with comics. So anytime they work together, it like gives me all warm and fuzzy feelings. So I'll go with them.
For sure. So now we are going to dive into some straight up comic book questions. Owen likes comics. Hopefully, you're going to like these questions. First off, from your YouTube community, Eric Daniels asks, who is your favorite DC hero, your favorite Marvel hero, and your favorite comic book character overall?
Um, I think Marvel character, it's probably Spider-Man's up there, obviously.
Hmm.
I love Reed Richards. I love the Fantastic Four. Um, One of my kind of dark horses for favorite Marvel characters is the Sentry, just because I think
Yeah,
like
he's great.
he's not only is he such a fascinating, intriguing character. If you've not read like the original Marvel Max miniseries, I think
Oh,
it was only
do it.
3 issues from like 2000. It's one of the most beautiful books Marvel have ever put out. It's such a unique way of storytelling for Marvel. It almost feels like a Neil Gaiman book or something of that
Yeah,
ilk. And it's so sad and somber, and it's about like this superhero that the world forgot. And then like my introduction to the Sentry was in New Avengers, and he's such a great part of that book.
for sure.
DC, it's probably Superman, which is funny given I grew up as a Batman kid, but I think there is something to that idea of kids grow up wanting to be Batman because he's cool and he's badass and he's got all the gadgets, and it's meant to be kind of more attainable because he doesn't have any like otherworldly powers.
Right.
But I think when you grow up and you start to get what makes Superman so great, which is his kind of his empathy and his humility and his compassion, like that's more attainable than anything Batman has because it's just being a good person. And
Hmm.
whether you're like an alien god from Krypton or whether you're just like an everyday person, those are things that you can do and you should do so. So
Yeah,
probably like if I had to just pick one character, probably be Superman because
nice.
he's just wholesome.
I couldn't agree more. I think
Very jealous
no
of that
reason.
t-shirt. I would most definitely want one.
This is like a 6-year-old T-shirt.
Oh,
I, g-
it's
I got
really
this.
cool.
I got this way back when Redbubble was like the new thing in town, and like this was during that period that you were talking about with Super Heavy, the
Yeah.
Truth
So I was
Action
going to say
Comics
it looks
run.
like the when he's
Yeah,
depowered, and it looks like the kind of shirt he was wearing
love
then.
that
It's
arc. Greg Packer and Cuter, my boys. Next up, we have Brendan B from your YouTube community who asks, "What comic has impacted you the most personally, and what about it made you love it?"
ooh, that's a good question.
Yeah.
Because obviously there's a difference between just kind of like what I think are the best comics and my
Hmm.
favorites, and ones that have like really emotionally resonated with me.
Hmm.
Um, like a recent example is probably Tom King and Mitch Gerard's Mr. Miracle.
Yes,
Um,
absolutely.
as like I just released like a really big video slash kind of short documentary on that. That is a book I've read at least 20 times, probably 30 or more, over like the last 2 or 3 years. And like it's a book that I resonate with a lot, both in terms of like its portrayal of a lot of issues that a lot of people deal with in kind of mental health and stuff like that, and the very kind of human approach to telling this story about mental health from the perspective of alleged gods. But then also like how it exists as like a tribute to Jack Kirby, who is like, like the godfather of comics, and especially Marvel and DC. His fingerprints are in every corner of comics and superheroes, and how that book not only is so relatable and human just from the perspective of anyone that's ever kind of had any difficulties in their life, but then
Yeah.
also how it exists as such like a loving and genuine tribute to like not only one of like the most important creators, but someone who at times didn't always get the recognition and the adoration they deserved. I think to me that makes that just such a beautiful series.
Yeah, it is ridiculously good. I cry every time I read that book. It is wonderful. Um, Next from Twitter, Arifin S. Sadiq at ArfGuy writes, "If a writer has a long run on a comic, is your preference to have the comic come out monthly with various artists or a single artist, even if there are delays in publishing?"
I mean, I'm slightly biased in that I don't really read issue to issue anymore. It's
Mm,
not something I've really done. The only exception in like the last 5, 6, 7 years was when House of X was coming out, Powers of Ten,
yeah.
because it was such like a massive relaunch of X-Men, and I'm such a big fan of Hickman. That was something where I was like getting it every single issue. Other than that, pretty much since then, I've pretty much gone back to just reading by the trades. So I'm slightly biased in that, you know, delays don't necessarily. I'm like always at least 5 years behind on comics anyway, so I probably won't notice. It's like I'm about to start reading properly. Probably I'm about to start properly reading Immortal Hulk. I've read
Nice.
like the first couple of issues, but I haven't like gone deeper than that. And
Mhm.
I've just bought like the first two omnibuses. But it's like if there was like a 6 month delay on that book, I have no idea because I'm like 3 years behind on that series. But I do think like having consistency with an artist is important.
Yeah.
Um, like at least volume to volume or like story arc to story arc. Like when it gets like within issues, like from say you're doing a 6 issue story, if you change an artist in issue 3, it can be quite, it can kind of break the immersion a little bit of the kind of the world that you've attached yourself to.
Right.
When I was rereading all of Morrison's new X-Men run for the video I did a few months ago on that has quite a lot of different artists work on it, and a lot
Hmm.
of people kind of do a couple of issues, leave, and then come back.
Right.
There's not really like one, like Frank Quitely does a good bulk of it, but
Yeah.
doesn't do all of it. Like there's
Yeah.
plenty of like sections. There's like a 2 year period where Quitely doesn't draw any X-Men, and there's just a lot of other people. So that was kind of like it was noticeable, and it was like not so much frustrating, but you do have to kind of like reacclimatize yourself to the world that you're reading, despite the fact you've kind of been reading it for a sustained period of time,
Yeah,
just
of
because it
course.
looks and feels slightly different. So
Right. And you mentioned Grant Morrison, and so I'm going to pull this question from Critical Rants, our good buddy Cole at critical_rants. Go check out his newest video on Teen Titans. It is a great cartoon, and it's a great video. He asks, what are some of your favorite Grant Morrison stories? He also writes, and congrats on 50,000 subscribers, Owen. It's so, so well deserved.
oh, thank you so much. Favorite Grant Morrison stories? That is like asking about like asking a parent what their favorite child is. I can't I can't pick all of them.
Publicly, you can't pick. Privately, you know what it is,
This
but
is going to be public though. People are going to watch this. If this was just us talking, maybe I could give you one. Um, I think if I had to just pick one, I'd probably go with All Star Superman.
mm,
Mostly because I think that might be the greatest graphic novel ever written.
yeah,
It's an absolute masterpiece, and it's also maybe the most Morrison book
yes,
because it's like it's this combination of like real, genuine, relatable human emotions and situations. You know, it's basically the story of what if Superman finds out he only has a year left to live,
hmm,
and the kind of how that affects him and affects those that are close to him. That's like
yeah,
a really human story to tell with like a godlike character. But then also it's filled with so many like high concepts and fantastical elements that like completely alienate someone that doesn't know anything about comics. And even like for me, who's like not only been reading comics for a long time, but like given that I write and talk about them a lot, I like to think I have a pretty decent knowledge of Marvel and DC
yeah.
history.
It's
There are even
decent, I would
points in All
say.
Stars. There's even points in All Star Superman where I have to stop and be like, "Wait a second, who's that? What's going on here?"
Zabaro,
And it's like, oh yeah, it references something else that Grant Morrison did like years ago. That it's like, oh, okay, I should
yeah,
probably go and read that. But All Star Superman it's a genius book. It's really great. It's my favorite Superman story. It's probably my favorite like self-contained comic book story. So yeah, we'll go with that.
yeah. It's wonderful. I also do want to give a quick shout to Flex Mentallo because that book is
Yes,
ridiculously good and
Hero of
super
the
underrated.
Beach.
Hero of the Beach.
I love
Um,
Muscle Mystery.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And Clark Kent does show up in that book as well.
That he does.
So so good.
Another,
Um,
just another quick one because it's
yeah.
something I have been reading recently. Is Morrison's run on Animal Man? Is also
Yes.
particularly because that's like one of the things that like really like helped Morrison break out.
Yeah.
And given that it's like such like a Z-list character, no offense to all the Animal Man fans out there, it's like one of Morrison's most like autobiographical books. It's probably
Yeah.
that or like the Doom Patrol run
Yeah.
for different reasons. What I love about Animal Man is not only has it become like an existential horror at times, especially the parts where like Animal Man meets Grant Morrison and Morrison becomes like a
Yeah.
character in the book, but also like it's quite progressive in that it deals with like themes of like veganism and vegetarianism,
Right.
which as a vegetarian I find like really cool that like Morrison, especially with a character like Animal Man, it's such
Yeah.
like a perfect place to tell a story about those kind of things. And so
Right.
it's a run that I'm rereading at the moment and I have a big fondness for.
Yeah, and go into a question about a character that Grant Morrison has spent a considerable amount of time on. Alfonso Uresti, I hope I said that correctly, asks, "What's your opinion on Green Lantern Earth One? I feel that it's one of the best, if not the best, take on a character from the Earth One catalog."
Ooh, I'd agree. Green Lantern Earth One. It's one I missed until I was making the History of Earth One video. Because like in the pretty much since the New 52 like really got underway, the Earth One books kind of stopped being a big deal at DC.
Hmm.
Obviously, like they were always quite slow to release them because they're original graphic novels written by writers that are doing a load of other ongoing books.
Right.
That was the they had like superstar artists and writers. They had like John Straczynski, Morrison writing like the big books, and like obviously they're doing a lot of other stuff. So
Yeah,
it and like the art in some of them is great. So, like for example, with the Batman Earth one, it's I think it's Gary Frank's best art,
it's
and
incredible.
it's art you wouldn't get if it was coming out monthly
Yeah,
because you've really got the time to fine tune the details. And but because of the kind of how slow they can be to be released, I think people just kind of like forgot about the Earth One books. They don't feel like a priority.
right.
It's like, for example, the third volume of Batman's come out recently, and I haven't read that yet.
Yeah,
Despite really loving the first two volumes, I'm actually quite a massive fan of that take on the character.
agreed. Yeah, I've
So
I've got
when
it sitting on my shelf.
nice, nice, I know nothing about. I don't even know like who the villain is or anything in it.
I don't
I've like
either.
specifically just like stayed away from any details, just so when I finally get round to it, I can sit down and read it and enjoy it. But yeah, the Green Lantern series is really good. And
Crazy
it was
good.
when I was writing the history of Earth One video, it was the only of the characters I hadn't read. I'd
Hmm.
read the Batman Superman books, then I'd read the Wonder Woman series, then I'd read the first volume of Titans, and so yeah, it wasn't for me.
Not great. Not good.
But I hadn't read the Green Lantern one. I
Yeah.
knew nothing about it, and then I get it and I read it, and it's this kind of like almost like space horror, like dystopian, like future.
Yeah.
It's a kind of story. It's like such a strange and interesting like reimagining of the Green Lantern concept in like the world of like Alien or
Yeah.
Blade Runner or something like that. And it's I haven't read the second volume yet, but I really want to because I think that first volume is it might be and like I'm not the most clued up person on Green Lantern. It's not really a character that I spent a lot of time reading, but it's probably one of my favorite Green Lantern stories and one that I'd love to see adapted in an animated movie or even a film. I think it's an awesome way of kind of bringing a new twist to that character.
Yeah, agree. The second volume is excellent, by the way, and I definitely recommend it. But now
Nice.
that you've got like it in my head, I really want to see a Ridley Scott Green Lantern project.
Ooh.
Like that sounds incredible. But we now go to a question from DeWolf from your YouTube community. He asks, "What is your favorite run on a comic?" He gives some examples: Burns X Men, Simonson's Thor, Sandman, etc.
The two that come to mind straight away are Bendis and Bagley's run on Ultimate Spider-Man. I could cheat and just say Bendis's run and include the Sarah Pichelli Miles stuff, but I'll specifically keep it to Bendis and Bagley as a duo.
Hmm.
That is like that was like the first proper run I read like every issue of as it was coming out.
Yeah,
Um, and it's also like one of the big modern runs that goes on for like nearly a decade.
for sure.
But I think you can't really top Claremont and Byrne on X Men because
Yeah.
not only does Claremont write it for 19 years, which is like, if that was a person, Claremont basically raised an adult. Like, just to comprehend that. But I specifically think that the years with Byrne as an artist are like the best version of X Men and like the best time for X Men stories.
Yeah,
So it's very hard to overlook Claremont and Byrne.
for
But also, it's
sure.
great because like not only is Byrne a great artist, he's also such a great writer. And
Right.
it's like the combined genius of those two creators. It's quite hard to top in any other duo.
Yeah, agree. And it's I think even more special because we're never gonna see someone do a 20-year
It's like,
stint on
well,
another
that's it.
character.
Who does like we talk about like Hickman as like the guy that does like super long runs now, and he
Yeah.
does like 7, 8 years, and that's still like really long in comics. So
Yeah.
for Claremont to do 19 years on X-Men, and you know, even when he left, I think if it wasn't for editorial wanting to go in a different direction in '92, he
Hmm.
probably could have gone for a few more years. So
I'm sure.
it's such an achievement and such a feat, and especially given that to write the same title for that long and it
Yeah.
doesn't get stale or repetitive.
Yeah,
You never
that's the
read
biggest
any
thing.
part of Claremont's X-Men and think, I've kind of retreading old ground here. It always manages to do something new and something different. It's just such a brilliant achievement. It's such a great series. It's
Agreed.
one of my
And then he comes
favorites.
back and knocks it out of the park again with Revolution.
Yeah,
It's like, it's
Revolution,
really.
a run so great they had to give the reins to Grant Morrison to fix.
We now have a question from SIR from your YouTube community, sir. He asks, pretty cliche question, but I've got to ask, what is a famous or beloved comic storyline that you honestly aren't a fan of?
Um, that's a good question. There's not many that come to mind in that I like outright hate. That I'm like, why are you people enjoying this?
Hmm.
I think the Killing Joke's one that I have like quite a weird relationship with. Um, there's a lot of
Yeah.
stuff in it. I'm a big Alan Moore fan. Um, as you know, I got to represent those British comic book creators. Brits do make the best comics. That is a fact. And I'm also claiming Chris Claremont, even though he sees himself as
Whoa.
more of an American, he is British. So I'm claiming him
All right. All right.
in my British army of comic creators. But yeah, The Killing Joke's something I have like quite a weird relationship with because I think it's the book that captures the dynamic between Batman and Joker best. I don't think anyone's written a series that captures their relationship and their dynamic as well as Killing
Yeah.
Joke. There's also a lot of other stuff in it that's not aged, but like specifically well, particularly the
Yeah.
Barbara aspect.
Yeah.
You know, well, what happens to her is really famous and is used in other stories to kind of turn her into Oracle, and she
Hmm.
becomes like a really, really great character. I love Oracle, especially in like the '90s era and stuff like No Man's Land. She's such a big
Yeah.
character. She is kind of she doesn't really have a lot of agency in the Killing Joke herself. It's mostly just
Yeah.
things happen to her to impact Gordon and Batman and other characters, and so it can be quite a tough read
Hmm.
in hindsight. But also, like I won't go as far as say it's a terrible story because it's like probably the best Batman Joker story, as well as like the definitive Joker origin story.
Right.
But I just have like a bit of a difficult relationship with it, I guess.
Yeah. I I can't argue there. We get a question now from That One Doesn't Count on Twitter, who asks, what are some of your favorite indie comics or more under the radar stories from the big two that you think need more attention?
In terms of indie comics, obviously, like Invincible is like the thing everyone's talking about this year.
For sure.
Um, Eric is very happy about that, considering
I
he's doing a
am.
series on his podcast about Invincible that you should all go
Yeah.
listen to because I'm listening
Thanks,
to it
man.
every week and really enjoying it.
Every
But
Friday.
other than that, every Friday. Other than that, um, I'm a really big fan of James Tinney and Something's Killing the Children.
Mm.
That is like one of the best indie comics I've read in a long time. I think it's only 2 or 3 volumes, and I think someone's just bought the rights to adapt it, the
Oh, that's
series or
great.
the film. So I definitely recommend checking that out. And another one is Radiant Black by Cal Higgins.
Yes.
Is a great series. I
Agreed.
remember I got into it because Comic Drake, was talking about it and described it as like the next Invincible.
Which is
Um,
some hefty,
oh
hefty
yeah,
shoes to
that's like
fill.
high. Not in so much that like it feels like an Invincible clone, more so like it is an indie book that could have the same impact
Yeah.
in terms of like indie superheroes that Invincible had. And I'm not like fully up to date with it. I've read like the first couple of issues, but it's fantastic. And Kyle Higgins is a friend of the channel, and he's a great writer, and it's a great series. So they're probably the two that I recommend.
Yeah. And if you are not caught up on Radiant Black, that fourth issue is a doozy. It's a great series. It really
It
is.
is.
So next, going to a popular popular topic of discussion in this Q&A from your YouTube community. Chris Craven asks, which of Hickman's books are your favorite? Jonathan Hickman, that being. Also, are you planning on doing any more deep dives on his Marvel tenure after the recent Maker video? Love your videos. Thank you and congrats.
Oh, thank you so much. I'll answer the second part of that question first. I don't have any Hickman videos like scheduled. I normally plan like 2 months in advance, so that's like 4 or 5 videos
Wow.
in like a block. I told you I have to stay organized,
I
otherwise it falls
know.
like a house of cards.
I just
Um,
that amount of preparation, I can't
I mean, it can
imagine.
completely go out the window. I can look at next month's schedule and go, actually, I want to talk about this, and just completely, which does happen quite a lot,
Mhm.
surprisingly. But I don't have any Hickman videos. I think the thing with Hickman videos is because it's always such a long run, it's something that's going to require like a lot of research. That's the kind of video that will take me like months to like write the script to a level that I'm really happy with it.
Mhm.
But there are plenty of Hickman runs and Hickman books that I'd love to talk about. A few people have asked me about doing a House of X video,
Yeah,
and I'd love to, but I kind of think that'd be best to wait once we're further into the kind of his X-Men era.
for
I,
sure.
I think it's a bit too early to kind of analyze, and I don't know the full picture. There's still so much in that book that's not been answered yet.
Mhm.
I kind of want to just have some kind of separation between it and the ongoings until I can like properly dive into it.
Yeah.
Um, my favorite Hickman story is the Time Runs Out series in
Yeah.
Avengers. That is like one of the best Avengers stories ever. The way it
Mhm.
builds off the previous things Hickman had done, like Infinity,
Yeah.
sets up Secret Wars, but it's also like I've never known hopelessness and desperation in the Marvel
Yeah.
universe quite like Time Runs Out, especially like the last couple of issues when it just turns into pure chaos and you've got like that iconic page of like Cap and Tony fighting at the end of the world. It's
Mhm.
beautiful. It's incredible. It encapsulates so much of what I think makes Hickman brilliant. But I'd love to talk about a video just on Time Runs Out. I'd love to do
Yeah.
a video on his Fantastic Four run. I'm glad I finally got to talk about his Ultimates run,
Yeah.
because like
Super
it's
good.
only it's only like 11 issues, which is like weirdly short for Hickman. And it was at a time when the Ultimates books weren't like selling massively, so a lot of people kind of skipped it. But like that was my first introduction to Jonathan Hickman, and I think it still holds up. And it's also like I think it might have been the first time he worked with Assad Ribic at Marvel as well, which
Mm,
obviously they reteamed for Secret Wars. So it's like a really great starting point to like get into Hickman, and then like his Fantastic Four, his Avengers, Secret Wars, and X-Men. Like there's I'm never going to be short for ideas for Hickman videos.
for
It's
sure.
just like dedicating the right amount of time it'd take to give one the proper treatment it deserves.
Yeah, I for one would love to see that time runs out video eventually. I love that story so much. The like you said, the desperation, the Thor and Hyperion versus Beyonders scene is still one of my favorite comic book scenes, like period. Marvel,
Yeah.
DC, whatever. It is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And then we are going to round out comic book questions with a question from your Twitter. This is from Jonathan Sheehan at jsheehan90, who asks a pretty big question. Who do you think are the most influential comic book creators since the turn of the century? So since the year 2000 onward.
Since the year 2000, I think I'm going to break it into one Marvel, one DC, and one indie. I think is
Love
the
it.
best way to do that. I think in terms of Marvel, like it or not, I think it's probably Brian Michael Bendis. In that time, he wrote everything there is to write at Marvel.
For better
So
or for
many big,
worse.
so many big event books, but then also like he wrote Ultimate Spider-Man, so he wrote Spider-Man for years. He did New Avengers. He did obviously he did an X-Men run. He did Guardians of the Galaxy. He did
Right?
so many like other like different big books at Marvel. He was kind of like the guy for the longest time there. And obviously went to DC and he's done some interesting stuff over there. So he's probably like more so than anyone the person that's like shaped the Marvel universe over the last like 15, 20 years. Um, Over at DC, you could probably say the same thing for someone like a Jeff Johns.
Mm-hmm.
Both like the stuff they were doing in like Green Lantern Rebirth and Flash Rebirth, and then being like the main architect of the New 52 in like Rebirth.
Right.
Like that's all like the Johns era of DC, and that's like such a big period of their history.
Right.
And again, it's another one like can be quite a polarizing creator at times,
For
but I
sure.
don't think you can argue their impact in the last like century.
Yeah.
And for indie creators, I'm probably going to go with Robert Kirkman,
Yeah.
because like between Invincible and The Walking Dead, they are probably two of the biggest indie books, definitely two of the biggest image books to have come out in that time. You know,
Right.
they've both become like massive pop culture franchises. The Walking Dead is weirdly massive in the fact that it's still on,
Still
which
on.
blows my mind.
Mm-hmm.
But it is like it's one of the biggest shows of the century.
Yeah.
You know, they're talking about spinning off. There's been spin-off shows. They're talking about doing films. It's this massive thing that's come from an independent comic book, and then
Mm-hmm.
Invincible, you know, could end up the same way. The first season of that has come out. You know, there's plenty of room to go with that series, and yeah, I think Kirkman is probably like the go-to indie person, affecting like that side of the industry in the same way like a Bendis and a Johns have affected the big two.
Yeah. Absolutely agree. So as we're wrapping up here, we got a final little category here: questions about the channel that I think are very. Just smacked my pop filter.
You made that feel
Um,
really important. I thought that was like
like a
ringing the temperature.
gong.
Yeah, I might put some sound effect into that to make it sound
Perfect.
really grand and epic.
Love it. So these are questions that I think are relevant since we are celebrating the channel and are celebrating 50K. Ethan Yunt, probably said that incorrectly, and I apologize, from Twitter, at Yunt underscore Ethan asks, what's a topic you've always wanted to cover but haven't?
For the longest time, that was Mr. Miracle. Um,
Mm,
it's a video that I was basically writing for the best part of 18 months and really struggling to articulate all of the things I wanted to say. You know, there's a reason it's the longest like essay video I've ever made by like a good distance. It's nearly 40 minutes long. Um, there's so much I wanted to talk about in that book, and especially once I researched it and all the different kind of allusions and references to Kirby. And there's so many deep ones and so many like things that unless you were like incredibly well read up on Kirby's life, you wouldn't know to throw in.
yeah.
So like the more I dived into Mr. Miracle, the more I found that I had so much to say, and trying to write a script and jot all these things down in a cohesive manner can be really challenging, especially when you write. That video was longer. The script of that was longer than my dissertation for my undergraduate degree, and
Wow.
it's almost as long as the one I did for my master's thesis.
That's
Like that is
wild.
a massive undertaking, so it's no surprise it took me that long to write. But I think
That's
in terms of
crazy.
like now that's out and that kind of I can finally put that part of my life behind me. The next one that's like I want to cover, but I don't know when I will, is doing a video on Miracle Man, specifically the Alan Moore era
Mm,
of Miracle Man.
yeah.
It means a lot to me, both because it's Alan Moore's one of my favorite creators, and I think it's one of his best works, and also like how it's significant as like a British comic.
Hmm.
Um, and it's a comic that not only is British in the way that it's published, but in terms of its themes and the things it's about, is like so connected to Britain in the 1970s and early 80s. It's very influenced in the same way like stuff like V for Vendetta is. It's very influenced by British culture and British politics at the time. And as a historian of British social history, there's plenty there that I can like dive into and do like maybe a similar kind of thing to the Mr. Miracle video, but about the things that that's about. But
Yeah.
then also talking about like the weird history of Miracle Man, how it
Yeah.
started because the UK distributor for Captain Marvel couldn't get their hands on the comics because of the lawsuit between Fawcett and DC. So they created their own version called Marvel Man, and then they went away, and then someone else tried to bring them back years later, but couldn't call them Marvel Man because Marvel Comics had taken that name, so they
Mm,
called them Miracle Man. And there's like such like a wild history, both like fictional in terms of like the publishing side, the thematic side, but then also like Alan Moore's 12 issue story is also an amazing comic book. It's got some
yeah.
beautiful art. It's got beautiful dialogue. It's so poignant and so deep. It's like very Watchmen esque, but like a
Hmm.
decade before Watchmen. It's
Yeah.
really like more setting the seeds for like the way he like revolutionized comic book storytelling. It's such a great book. Um, I would recommend if you want to learn more about it. There's a great book out there from someone that worked with more quite closely called Poison Chalice, which I've
Hmm.
been reading. I want to read more of, and it is really like a great history of Marvel Man slash Miracle Man, and specifically like the early years of Alan Moore's career.
Yeah.
So that will kind of be like one of my go-to sources in that video.
Hell
When eventually it happens, it's one of those. I
yeah.
originally was going to do that video early this year, but other things have got in the way, and it's going to be a big undertaking, so it might still be a while. But that's one that I'm really looking forward to sharing with people, and one I definitely want to do at some point.
So yeah, make sure you look for that in spring of 2023, and
Mm.
it's gonna
It's
gonna
like
knock your socks off.
it's like the Matt Reeves Batman movie. It's just
Yeah,
it's coming out at some point. That movie was
it's
already meant to come out
we'll get
now.
there.
What's going to come out first? This video I've been hyping for ages, or Man of Steel 2?
We're gonna find out. We're gonna find out real quick. But yeah, if you take anything from that, Owen's a fan of miracles. If you pay attention to that.
Well, that's another reason why I kind of pushed it off the slate. Once I decided I was finally going to do the Mr. Miracle video, I'm like, they're gonna cannibalize each other. Miracle Man, Mr. Miracle.
We'll just
That's gonna
change the channel to
confuse.
Owen likes miracles.
Maybe I believe in miracles. Could like license that or something. It'd be
Yeah, I'm sure that's easy. I'm sure that
yeah.
wouldn't cost any
How
money.
hard can it? How hard can it be?
Yeah. And then kind of the flip side to that last question on your YouTube community from Jack Spedici. I'm sorry. Um, they ask, what's a comic run slash character you want to make a video on but never will, either due to controversy or the lack of views it would have?
Um, there's not really anything I wouldn't cover due to like my personal attachments. If anything, that makes me want to talk about a book more.
Hmm.
Another one of like the big videos I want to make in the future is doing like a dive into the entire Ultimate Spider-Man,
Yeah.
um, and talk about like how much that book impacted me and helped me get into comics and helped me really fall in love with the medium, and kind of do an almost like autobiographical video through the perspective of that. That's another look for that in 2025 or 2026. Um, so like my personal feelings of a book, if anything, are going to make me want to talk about it more because I've clearly got something to say.
For sure.
As for the other side of that question, there are a couple of books that I wanted to do videos on that I'm not looking to do videos on
Yeah.
because of like things surrounding the creators involved with them,
Hmm.
um, and not wanting to kind of signal boost people that might not be as upstanding citizens as you hope people are.
Right.
I don't want to kind of name names or get into it, but there's a couple of like, if you're kind of ear to the ground in terms of what's going on in the medium, you're probably aware of at least one of these kind of situations.
Right.
And while it's a shame because like some of those books that are now kind of off the table are books that I like really deeply love and want to talk about and have a lot to say about, there's still like loads of other comic books that are still yet to be covered. So I'm not. It's not like I'm running low on ideas
Yeah.
because those specific books are off the table, I guess.
Not exactly hurting for content. So we've got two questions left here. First off, coming from Twitter, from New Comics at New Comics. That's NU Comics. They say,
Like new
"Congrats,
metal.
Owen." They say, "Which of your videos do you have the most fondness for, and what made it so special to you?"
I think I have like three videos that like I'm really really proud of more so than any of the others. Um, you mentioned the Spider-Man life story video earlier. That's one that I'm really proud of, and
Yeah.
that was like I really tried to do something a bit different with that video in terms of the format, and I really tried to like challenge myself,
Hmm.
and I think it really turned out. I still get comments on that video saying that like I'm rewatching this again and it makes me cry. And it's like
Yeah.
you can't get. I got a comment on the All Star Superman video saying exactly that yesterday,
Hmm.
and it's like you wouldn't. This video's nearly 2 years old, and you wouldn't think people are still watching it and crying, but here I am. So they're two that like I really like have a deep proudness of. The
Yeah.
recent Mr. Miracle documentary for the same reasons. That's like such a labor of love from me.
Yeah.
They're probably the three videos that like really mean a lot to me. And like once I sent them on their way to the algorithm to do with what they must, I was like, I really hope that people like these because I'm really proud of them. So
Yeah, and rightfully so. They are wonderful, wonderful videos. Even, if you don't think you have the time to sit down and watch a 40-minute video on Mr. Miracle, trust me, you have the time and you should make the time because it is a tearjerker, it is informative, it is basically like a distillation of what your channel is all about. It's informative, it is heartfelt, and you come away from it having not just a bigger appreciation of Mr. Miracle, but also secretly of Jack Kirby. It's a fantastic video, and it's definitely one of my favorites. And not just because Mr. Miracle is one of my favorite comics. It is legitimately excellent. And we are going
awesome.
to end things here appropriately with a question from another Owen. This is Owen's reviews on your YouTube community. And he asks, what would you say is the coolest thing that's happened to you since you began this channel?
Oh, that's a good question. There's been a lot of like really crazy things that have happened in like the 6 years that Owen Likes Comics has existed. Obviously, like both in terms of things that have come through the channel and then things that have happened in life outside of that. Obviously, my toils in academia have been quite the thing to run concurrently with the videos and the channel.
Right.
That's quite a big achievement. Starting the doctorate this year is quite the feat. Um, in terms of like things that have come around that are kind of related, going to Star Wars Celebration a couple of years ago was awesome. That was such a great opportunity when it was in London.
Super
Um,
cool.
that was like, obviously, that's without going to San Diego Comic Con or something like that. That's as good as you're going to get. That was like quite the surreal experience. There
Hmm.
were loads of big announcements when we were there. I got to watch Carrie Fisher do like an interview, not like one only like 6 months
Wow.
before she passed away, and they announced the Solo movie and they brought the whole cast out, and that was like quite the, it was really that was a really cool thing um, to go to and kind of be a part of.
Hmm.
But then also just stuff like the amount of like friends and like fellow like colleagues I've made along the way, people that like years ago I admired and really looked up to, and now are like people I can like I talk with regularly and I kind of bounce ideas off of and ask me for my opinion on things that they're doing. I think that's like the respect of your kind of peers and people you respect in your kind of line of work and
Yeah.
your kind of um, thing you do. Like that's quite a surreal feeling to have. And that's kind of more than anything a good sign that you're kind of doing the right things.
Yeah.
When the people you kind of look up to appreciate and kind of appreciate the stuff you do and kind of are a fan of your work,
Hmm.
that's quite a humbling experience that really puts into perspective kind of how far the journey's gone and where it's still going.
And it is still going. We're celebrating 50K here. We've got 50K plus to go. And that wraps up the Q&A portion of this.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you everyone for submitting these questions. You all really grilled me to the highest extent, and I appreciate that. Yeah, thank you for sending them in. I really appreciate it. Thank you all for helping us get to 50K. It's a
Yeah,
brilliant achievement, and I can't wait for the next big thing we can celebrate. Um, Thank you, Eric, for coming on and helping moderate this.
absolutely, man.
I really appreciate that. If you'd like to plug away and tell everyone where they can find you, the floor is yours.
Sure. I am a voice actor out here in Los Angeles. If you want to follow my stuff, I have a website, Aeric Azana, AericAzana.com. You can follow along with my stuff there. I'm on Twitter at That Daring Man, and I also have a podcast that Owen so graciously alluded to multiple times here. It's called Geek Explained. Every week, I take a look at all kinds of geeky culture, whether it be comics, film, TV, video games, all of it. And I talk. Sometimes I have great guests. Sometimes I am, most of the time, I'm going solo. Right now, I'm actually in the middle of Captain America month. July, we're celebrating Steve Rogers and the whole mantle of Captain America. Recently, we dropped an episode with Scott Nicewander from the Nerdsick YouTube channel about the history of Captain America in cartoons. And then I also just, I'm guessing when this goes up, I'll have dropped the episode that talks about Captain America the First Avenger, celebrating 10 years. I tell the whole story about how that film came to be. It is a ridiculous story, kind of tracking that, and it's awesome. And then Owen also mentioned on Fridays we do the Geek Explain Book Club, where myself, alongside good brothers Malcolm, Russell Nelson, and Jacob Brown, we are going through every single issue, every single volume of Robert Kirkman, Cory Walker, and Ryan Ottley's Invincible. It is wonderful. We have a great time. It's not as scripted as my, or at least we don't do as much structure with it as the normal podcast. So it gets a little wild and a little crazy, but it's a fun time. And I'm reading through Invincible for the first time. So this is really, it's a fun time all around. So if you want to follow Instagram, Twitter for that, at Geek Explained Pod, it's at Geek Explained Pod, and then it's pretty much anywhere you can find podcasts. So yeah, check us out.
Yeah, I will leave links to both Eric's socials and the Geek Explain podcast in the description. Do go and check them out. I'm genuinely a big fan of the podcast. It's kind of in my regular rotation at the moment. Specifically, I'm loving the Invincible series as someone that's reading a lot of the later volumes for the first time. Um, Being able to kind of read up to where you were at and then kind of catch up and read it with you guys
Yeah.
has been like quite the cool experience.
Thanks so much, man.
So I can definitely recommend that. But yeah, thank you all so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, do make sure to leave a like, comment below. Let me know your thoughts, your answers to any of the questions we've talked about. I'd be interested to hear what you have to say. As always, if you enjoyed this, there should be some other videos on screen right now that you might also enjoy. If you want to help support the channel, you can help me out by signing up at patreon.com/OwenLikesComics, like David and Jeremy have done when they asked their wonderful questions. And yeah, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. So until then, take care and keep reading.